One of the themes that we talk about throughout the year, and if you go to council meetings and certainly if you attend our retreat, our annual retreat, a lot of growth-related issues come up. We were talking about this internally, and we felt like, we wanted to share a slide if we could to demonstrate that this growth is not only, it's not unique to Holly Springs. It's representative of this entire region of the state. I believe we've got the 6th fastest growing state in the country in terms of population. And if you'll look at this particular slide, you'll see that Wake County is the fastest in the state. You'll also see that 4 adjacent counties are also growing quite rapidly. So we have 5 of the top 11 fastest growing counties in the state of North Carolina right now. And if you look at the chart to your left, it shows how fast some of the municipalities in Wake County are growing, and it also shows where Holly Springs is in that grouping. It's very interesting. And I also wanted to show where the of course you see where RTP is, City of Raleigh and Durham County. Those are major employment centers, and it's one of the primary reasons where people are locating to this region. This is one of the top job markets in the country. And when you talk about Holly Springs over the year, we've had a number of very positive accolades. It's one of the best places to raise a family in the state. It's one of the safest communities in the state. And we, over the years, have been trying to create a quality of life that's very desirable. And the word's getting out, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're experiencing the growth that we are. We've got some housing market numbers we'll show toward the end of the presentation, which would indicate, just how desirable a place Holly Springs is in the surrounding community as well. This particular slide we showed during our budget workshop and also at our most recent town council meeting. It just shows the growth of the town and in the town's tax base. Our largest single general fund revenue source is our ad valorem taxes, and we need to continue to grow that tax base in order to keep up with demands for additional infrastructure and in order to maintain and in some cases improve the level of services that our citizens expect. You'll see in 15-16, that 3.99%, that is an estimate, a growth estimate that was provided to us by the Wake County Tax Office, and typically they are very conservative in what their estimates are in terms of what the growth estimates are in the tax base. So we historically exceed that number, and when you look at what our numbers have been in the past, particularly last year, we had a healthy growth rate of 9%. The tax rate has remained unchanged, and the budget was actually approved the 16th of this month, so we can say that in the past tense as opposed to what we're proposing. Solid waste fees also remain unchanged in this particular budget. We did have some proposed increases which were ultimately approved in development and user fees. It's consistent with the town's philosophy of the development community paying what we feel like is an equitable portion of expenses associated with those developments. We looked at our what we charge for various development-related fees. We looked at what it cost for us to provide those levels of service, and also looked at what some of the neighboring municipalities were charging, and we came up with fees, and those fees were supported and ultimately adopted by the town council. We do have some new positions also in this particular budget. Mid-year, we will be adding 3 firefighters to our force. We have an additional accountant in finance, an additional building inspector. That's really just due to the increased number of building inspections, and the fees generated by the developers or by the builders are actually going to be paying for the building inspector position. Also, we've added a streets technician to the Public Works Department. Capital improvements, we've shown what the total is there. That's a little above last year. What's relevant there is with the additional investment in our capital improvements, the town took on no new debt in this particular operating budget. Some of the items that we have purchased or planning to purchase in the upcoming budget year: a new leaf truck, so hopefully we can stay on schedule. We won't have any equipment breakdowns, which it seems like those inevitably happen during peak leaf season. Also a turf management type tractor that we can use on the Womble Park synthetic turf fields, as well as the synthetic turf fields at North Main Athletic Complex. That is the same piece of equipment, I understand, that was used at the recent World Cup event, where the soccer event where they were playing on artificial turf. They were using that same device, so that's state-of-the-art technology. The bottom right-hand corner, that's a gateway feature. We've been planning for years to have a nice gateway feature at the intersection of Sunset Lake Road and Holly Springs Road in the northeast quadrant of town. But that seemed to always, it never got funded because of the expensive nature of it. So this year we wanted to try to scale back what those plans are for the gateway features, but at the same time, enhance the appearance there at that main intersection as you're coming into town. So that's planned for this year. Our planning and zoning department will be heading that particular project up. And that other device is a self-contained breathing apparatus. We're going to have to, we're planning to purchase 25 of those for our fire department. It's been a number of years since we had replaced that equipment. It's pretty pricey, but it's certainly something that needed to be done. So that's planned as well. Once again, we were able to purchase or plan to purchase each of those items without any planned financing, primarily due to the healthy growth of the town. Once again, a slide we showed during the budget workshop and budget submittal is our legal debt margin. That's something that we talk about throughout the year. We certainly have an eye on that. Anyone that's familiar with the town of Holly Springs knows how fast that we've grown in a relatively brief period of time, and that doesn't happen by accident. The town leadership, really dating back to the 90s, understood that this region was poised for growth, but that in order for the town to be in a position to accommodate it, we had to invest in our infrastructure and invest. So when we look at that, you can see that we're trending in a really positive direction. Our as of this past audit, we're at 17% of our legal debt margin, and you can see that the high level of investment that's been occurring in town, it's a healthy indication that the debt is being spread over a larger tax base, which makes it easier to pay that debt. And that's really in keeping with what the business model has been for the town of Holly Springs over the last 15 years. Build the infrastructure, folks are coming, manage that growth, get the right quality of growth in your community to enhance that quality of life, and then spread that cost out so that it becomes affordable to all the residents. Switching quickly to the utility fund, we were able, once again, because of the growth in our water, not only customers but water usage, our utility rates remain unchanged this particular year. We did add a development inspector that will work within the engineering department. Also, another public works pump station technician was added. I touched on infrastructure just a moment ago and wanted to share with you some updated information as it relates to that. You'll see on the left the town's water situation or water capacity. We get our water from Harnett County, which is, they draw their water from the Cape Fear River Basin. We have an agreement with Harnett County where we have 10 million gallons of capacity, and you can see what our average daily usage is and what our peak usage is. That peak usage number is an important number, and it's a good indicator because you want to certainly make sure you have enough water during those summer months, and we're at about 35% capacity. So we're in a really strong position there. Then when you look at the wastewater, We recently got an approval from the state to proceed with upgrading our current facility, which is a 2.4 million gallon per day wastewater treatment facility. And with just a few minor upgrades, we can increase the capacity of that facility to 6 million gallons per day. The cost associated with that will be paid for from developer fees or wastewater reserves. So we don't anticipate needing to finance any debt associated with that facility as well. One thing that we're really proud of, and it's probably something that will largely go unnoticed, is that the town finally got approval from Diener to continue discharging its treated reclaimed water into Utley Creek. For years, for decades, the state was insistent that we relocate that and that we literally pipe it from our reclamation facility to Harris Lake. It would have cost $10 or $11 million to do that. The science didn't support it. And after years, over 15 years, I've been here going on 15 years, this was a topic of discussion before I got here in 2001. But it just gives you an idea of how long it takes sometimes to get these issues resolved. But I'm very glad to say, and I know there's members of the staff here that would also echo this, we're all very glad to say that this issue is largely behind us. We got our finding of no significant impact, which from an environmental standpoint, and we're set to go with making these upgrades to our wastewater treatment plant, and we'll continue to be able to discharge into to the Utley Creek Basin. What we found when we studied that basin is that our flow actually enhances the ecosystem. It doesn't have any significant detrimental impacts, but if we removed our flow, particularly during these dry summer months, it would have a negative impact on the ecosystem. So one of the things we talked about during retreat and also during budget workshop is had we been ultimately required to spend the money to pipe to Harris Lake, we would have ultimately had to go to our residents and ask for another rate increase to pay for this capital expense. So we're very proud and very gratified that that's not going to be the case. Has everyone had a chance to visit the North Main Athletic Complex, or most of you? Okay, and I've seen some of you there. That facility is nearing completion, and you'll see on the left-hand column the features of that. I guess the most visible one is the multi-sports stadium complex. That is where the Holly Springs Salamanders, I guess our highest profile tenant, is at. But the town is planning various parks and recreation programs there. Also weekend tournaments are also going to be scheduled there, as well as festivals and hopefully some music concert events that are planned for that facility. In addition, you have the 4 youth tennis courts, 8 adult tennis courts off to the, I guess, let me see, that would be if you look at the top picture, that'd be in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see the tennis courts. Also concessions area, restrooms, which will be shared by the stadium as well as those using the soccer facilities and the tennis courts, outdoor basketball, and also included in that North Main project was if you've driven along Main Street, which I'm sure virtually all of us have, you see that widening and some of those street improvements, that's included in this as well. Did want to talk a little bit about, if you've been out there to the stadium, you see some activity ongoing. And most of that work that you see ongoing is due to the Wake County Travel Tourism Grant, which the town was recently awarded. I believe it was in January. Very appreciative of that under Mr. Hartman's leadership, and also the Wake County Commissioners, that we got unanimous support for our grant. We had to make the case that this facility will generate, have a positive economic impact, and it would generate additional travel tourism dollars. And we feel like we made a very strong case, and the county agreed. So with that, what we have planned for that money at this point is we've already spent some of that money on an upgrade to the video board, which is in left field. The right field restrooms, which are under construction currently. If you visit the site, you'll see that. Then we have an auxiliary concession area, which is planned for the right field side of the stadium between Main Street and the right field wall, if you will. We're getting pricing from the contractor, T.A. Loving, and we should get those numbers in next week, and we'll be taking that to the council if the numbers look good, along with North Main Street streetscape improvements. Once that facility and all those improvements are completed, we'll be planning an open house. Each of you is certainly invited. We'd love to have you, and we'll be advertising that in the near future. Now, we talked about all the great things associated with growth, or I've tried to plug that, but there's also, obviously, when you're looking at a balance sheet, one of the negatives associated with it is added traffic congestion. So we wanted to talk a little bit about a couple projects that the town has been working on for years, literally for years, that will alleviate traffic in some of our more congested areas. Although a lot of the traffic that you see at the, and you'll see at the header there, Avent Ferry Road and the bypass intersection, a lot of the traffic along that intersection that adds to the congestion, particularly during peak travel times, doesn't originate from Holly Springs. It originates from Harnett County. It also originates from Fuquay and from areas to the south of us. Nevertheless, I think we have to deal with the burden of it, and the town's been very proactive over the years to try to get out in front of the of some of these congestion problems. The first project that I'll talk about, this will be one that you'll see this will be the first one that's completed, but it's actually the planning for this one came along a little bit later in the process, and this is Avent Ferry Road bypass intersection improvements. And essentially what this will do in the morning is it will create new lanes and medians for residents, for example, driving along Avent Ferry Road from the south and making that left turn onto the bypass. It'll help that intersection to function much more effectively. In the afternoon, there's an actual right turn lane that's being added. It'll be a free flow lane as you're heading south on the bypass to where you can make that right turn back on the Avent Ferry.
You have a set amount of green time, and you have to allocate it to all the approaches. Well, as you go around and you're allocating it to everybody, you're waiting. You're waiting through light cycles, and it's less time. So like you might get like 30 seconds of green time. So that's what has overall, because all these movements are allowed right now, your wait at the intersection is really long. So by removing the 8-phase and you take it down to what's called a 2-phase, you've opened up more green time because you've restricted the throughs and you've restricted the bypass left. So you don't even have to worry about them anymore. They don't take away from your green time.
We noticed a lot of congestion once those super streets were completed on the bypass a couple years ago. The super streets, and they have their critics and detractors, but one thing they do very well is move traffic efficiently north and south. They get down to that conventional intersection and it instantly became a bottleneck. So what the town did is we worked with DOT and also worked with members of the General Assembly and got funding, as well as Secretary Tata, who's been very supportive. We got close to $1 million to go toward the intersection improvements at this particular location, and the town borrowed a little over $600,000 to go toward these intersection improvements. Once those are complete, those major traffic movements will be more protected, and based on the study and analysis that's been done, this traffic problem will be I won't say completely alleviated, but it won't be nearly as severe as it is currently. Okay. This next project, we've been talking about this project for a long time, and I'd ask the staff to look. The Main Street extension, that's where we're planning to extend Main Street, Ralph Stevens Road, tie it eventually into Piney Grove, Wilburn. And once this project is completed, and it's actually it's classified as a regional DOT project, and we got 80% federal funding because of the nature of it. This will take about 25 to 30% of the traffic that is currently exiting Piney Grove, Wilburn, and being deposited onto Avent Ferry Road, which is also adding to congestion at that particular intersection. This project we're supposed to put out for bid later this year, and once we receive the bids and award the bids, it'll take 12 to 18 months to complete. This project, believe it or not, we started working on this in 2008. When we're finished with this project, we're going to be scaring 10 years to death. But think of what, in 2008, we were in a severe recession. Population of the town was less than 20,000 at that period of time. But we were aware that schools were going in. We knew that intersection was going to become more congested. We knew that there was, at the time, potential for additional development out Avent Ferry Road. So we started planning then and trying to make the case to the state to get funding. And we were ultimately successful in doing so. So it'll be good to see that, but once it's in place, and we'll be able to see the beneficial effects of less traffic on Avent Ferry Road. But I did think that it's interesting when you're sitting in traffic, it can be frustrating. Why doesn't someone do something? Why haven't they done something? And it's interesting to know that we've been working on this project for as long as we have, and these things do take, these projects do take years to sometimes come to fruition. Wake County is the fastest growing county in the state. That didn't happen last week. It's been one of the fastest growing regions of the state, certainly since I've been here, since 2001. We're all competing for very limited funds, transportation funds. These roads are not Town of Holly Springs roads. They go through the Town of Holly Springs, but they're Department of Transportation roads. They own them. They approve the funding. They approve the design for them. We can't do anything on these roads without their approval, and sometimes the processes that we have to go through lengthen the amount of time that it takes to get to see some of the needed infrastructure improvements. And if you're familiar with the budget negotiations at the in Raleigh currently, you realize that the urban areas of the state are in a tug of war with some of the rural areas of the state. They feel like the urban areas are getting more revenue, more dollars, if you will, than we should. And there's an effort underway. You may be familiar with it if you've been reading about it. You'll certainly read more about it if it actually happens, where the way the sales tax is distributed could be changed. Councilmember Cobb asked me when we were putting together the budget this year what my greatest concern in this particular budget is, and the budget that was just approved, we're fine this year, but next year, if certain members of the General Assembly get their way, we could see a shortfall being phased into those sales tax dollars. And the sales tax dollars in Holly Springs, for example, over the last 10 years have grown each year by about 10%. Okay, that's the second largest revenue source of our general fund. When you look at the actual growth in those revenue line items, it's actually now larger than the real growth in our ad valorem tax dollars. If that distribution formula is significantly changed, our largest growth revenue is compromised. And then our ability to meet some of these infrastructure needs and to pay some of the ongoing expenses associated with services and so forth, that becomes compromised as well. So that's an item that we are very concerned about. It's an item, I know our members of our town council have been in contact with representatives of the legislature we've certainly voiced our concerns. If you read the papers, and depending on what you see that's being distributed by certain members of the Senate, they'll say, the Senate plan, Holly Springs only stands to lose about $87,000 a year in 2021. That's based on 3.5% growth in that revenue source. As I indicated before, our growth is 3 times that much. It's averaging 10%. And when you compound that number over a 10-year period of time, it's not 87,000, it's not even 3 times 87,000. It approaches over $1 million a year. So that is a concern that we'll be watching moving forward. And I bring that up because if you're in contact with your legislators, particularly members of the Senate, and if you're concerned about this as we are, please share those concerns. Another project that's nearing completion in the town is our law enforcement center. It's located behind Yadkin Bank off of Holly Springs Road. It should be open in November. Then you see some of the information on it. It's a 28,000 square foot facility. It'll house all of our law enforcement activities. We did a space needs analysis a few years ago to determine what our long-term needs were. Went through a similar exercise with our water capacity, wastewater capacity, because it's an infrastructure. It's just a different form of infrastructure. And what we have designed and what has been built will meet the town's needs, law enforcement needs beyond 2030. So we feel very, very comfortable moving forward with that. That project, by the way, is being financed by the limited obligation bonds that the town approved last year. We also wanted to just put in a plug for the Holly Springs Fiber Network. It's essentially, the initial rings, if you will, have been completed, but we're continuing to expand that particular network. We've been approached by several private entities interested in leasing some of the dark fiber, and we've actually entered into a couple agreements for that. One of the initial ideas when we invested in the fiber network throughout town was to connect all of the town facilities, but it was also secondary to that. We were thinking if we could lease some of that dark fiber to a private company, perhaps they could offer an internet alternative to the business community. So it's out there, it's in place. Some of the benefits associated with that, and we knew when we put it in there would be some applications that come up that maybe we did not contemplate. One that we did contemplate was being able to put the cameras in at a lot of our public facilities, particularly at our parks, which enable us to open those synthetic turf fields, for example, without having staffing there, because we've got the video cameras in place. So that gives more free time, if you will, to just someone wanting to walk out on the field and maybe throw a frisbee or kick a soccer ball. We're also working, very preliminary, but working with DOT to possibly do some traffic signal synchronization throughout town and work it off of our fiber network. That was one of those applications we really hadn't thought about. It's very early in the process. That may or may not happen, but to our knowledge, that's not being done anywhere else in any other towns in North Carolina where DOT is actually using the town's fiber network to synchronize its traffic signals. My understanding is right now, if they want to resynchronize a traffic signal in the Holly Springs, they send someone from the Durham office to come down and literally go into the box and make changes. And the significance of these particular changes, if they can materialize, is they would be able to, at a remote location, if there's traffic congestion at a particular intersection, they'd be able to make adjustments to that intersection in real time. So it would make our existing traffic network much more efficient at minimal capital cost. And I think this is the last slide that we have. Just wanted to show the residential sales in Holly Springs. It just seems like a good barometer when you look at what the average sale price is in the community I think it reflects the desirability of people wanting to move, wanting to live within your community. And we've talked about some of those reasons. Certainly the job market being very strong, but I'd like to think also it's because of the vision of town leaders over the last 20 years or so to build a town that other people would want to live and want to raise their families in and start businesses.